How much does starting a small business cost? We're going to answer that great question in this video. Okay, let's rock. Let's talk about startup costs. How much does it cost to start a business, a small business? Okay, that depends on a couple things. One, is it going to be a home-based business? Is this going to be something you're having in your office at home? Or is it going to be something where you're going to full-fledged need to go find somewhere to lease space, maybe a building or somewhere in a shopping center, and you're going to need build out, right, to design the interior exactly how you want it, and a whole bunch of equipment. There's so many factors that go into play when determining how much money a small business is going to cost. So what I recommend is get a file like Excel out, like a spreadsheet. You could use Google Docs. They've got spreadsheets on Google Docs as well. And start jotting down and writing down and listing every single item you can think of. I mean, everything. So you know how brainstorming works. When you do this, you don't want to hold back. You want to get everything down on that spreadsheet you can. And once you think of everything and consult your significant other, your partner, your partners, whoever else, have them add to the list and spend some time doing that. Then in the next column over, start putting prices on what all that stuff's going to cost. And I know this seems super simple, but there's a lot more to this than just getting the stuff down. And the reason I say that is because the biggest mistake a lot of people make is they have an idea, general idea about how much money they're going to need to start a business. They'll say, hey, I need $100,000. And then they get the money and they get into building and they get it going, and then they don't have enough money. They fall short and they get into money trouble because in a lot of cases, they've already spread themselves really thin. Like they've already used their own money. They've already borrowed a ton of money. They're trying to figure out how to, they were trying to figure out how they could get even more money. So just to get, say, the initial $100,000, they went through freaking hell and back just to get it, right? And then once they got it, they were hopeful. They were trying to be optimistic that that was enough money. But please, please do not do that. Do not get into a business where you're not well funded, because there are going to be times when you struggle and you're going to need to have cash to make you survive. So delay your opening, delay starting your business until you feel super comfortable. And I know what I'm talking about. It's like, think about your checking account. You know how much your monthly expenses are, right? Like your rent and your insurance and your car payments and your food bill and everything that you spend every single month. You kind of know what your income's been. And you're like, okay, and I keep a couple $1,000s in my checking account or whatever, right? So you feel comfortable, say, with that number. Well, imagine if you ran out of that money, right? And you needed to put in another $5,000 or $10,000, right? Imagine how much pressure that would put on you. Well, in a business, it's usually a lot worse than that. You'd be lucky if you only needed $5,000 or $10,000 more dollars. If you fall short in a business, it might be 25, 50, 100, or 100,000, or way more than that, right? It could be significantly more. So you got to make sure that step one I was talking about, where you get the spreadsheet out and you start jotting down every possible thing. And when I say everything, I'm talking from computers and all the equipment specific to your business down to the freaking scales. If you're shipping, like you're going to need scales to the staplers and mouses, like the mouse pads. I mean, all this little stuff adds up and people don't realize it. Like, are you going to have, say, a setup in your lobby? Okay, you want to have a couple couches and chairs. Are you going to have a coffee table? Are you going to have a subscription to magazines, which I know in the past was a big thing. Now more people don't really do that as much because everybody's online. But all the different things, you're going to have some like nice plants kind of in your office area, right? Every single thing I mentioned costs money. Are you going to have that? So jot all that stuff down, because a lot of times when people are thinking about what they're going to set up and how they're going to do it, they're just like assuming a lot of stuff is like non-existent, or it's going to be free, or they don't think about a lot of that stuff. And you got to make sure that you get it jotted down. And what I do when I start figuring out what the estimated cost of starting my small business is I come back to it the next day. And then I go back the next day. And inevitably, there's more stuff to just keep adding and adding and adding. And then you want to make sure that you're realistic on the costs, especially if a lot of it's going to be labor, right? So if you're going to have to go hire contractors, start getting bids for stuff, and I would add like 20%. So if a job's going to cost you $10,000, put it down as $12,000, just in case they go over, or you want to make a few changes that cost more money. You have no idea how many times when you're doing build out, or you're painting walls, or you're doing whatever, it ends up costing more than you budgeted. So my ideal rule of thumb is to have about a 20% cushion just for your startup costs. In a business, if you're going to be getting into a business and you know what your monthly expenses are going to be and stuff like that, try your best to have at least 6 months worth of expenses, right? Enough to make your payroll. I mean, not everybody keeps that, but I'm just giving you recommendations. Try to have at least 6 months worth of payroll, 6 months worth of rent. And you might say, holy cow, that's a lot of money. Yes, it is. But heck, it might take you 3 months or 6 months or even longer to get off the ground. And if you're only budgeting enough money to get into a business for like the startup costs, well, you're not thinking long term. So the startup costs open your business. Now your business is open, but maybe you don't have a lot of customers, right? And if you don't have a lot of customers, how the heck are you going to continuously pay rent and your power bill and your gas bill and your phone bill and internet and everything else that comes up? Oh, and then something broke and now you got to pay somebody to come fix it. There's so many unforeseen expenses that come in a business that you have got to plan ahead. So I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to be realistic. The bearer of bad news, just to tell you that when you're opening these businesses, you need to make sure you're better funded. I'll tell you, it's a funny story. I've had several friends in the last few years approach me and ask me about different business concepts they had and different business ideas. And I've asked them in some cases, hey, send me a business plan, or hey, I'll sit down and talk to them, have lunch with them or something like that. And I'll hear, so how much I'll ask them, I'll say, how much do you think it's going to take to start the business? I mean, $150,000. I'll say, where'd you get to that number? And they'll start telling me like all the different stuff. And then I'll say, wow, did you factor in the fact that the landlord, when you signed the lease, because in these particular cases, they were going to rent out space to, like in a shopping center or something like that, or one of them was like a gym or whatever. But I said, have you taken into account that the landlord that you're going to sign the lease with is going to want at least 1 month of a security deposit? And they're like, I didn't even think of that. So like, let's say the rent's like $5,000. I'm just making that example. So the landlord's going to want a $5,000 security deposit. And the way that works is the landlord basically keeps it at the end of the lease. If you decide to leave and not lease the space anymore, and you honor every aspect of your lease and you do everything to where the landlord's satisfied, then they'll give you your money back. But in most cases, you can just kiss that money goodbye, because a lot of times as time goes on, you might end up applying it towards, when you're exiting the business or whatever, you're moving, there might be work that needs to be done. A lot of times the landlord will say, hey, we're going to have to spend some money to redo stuff, and we got some wear and tear here. You just never know what a landlord will come up with, so I would not count on that money. But anyway, that was one example of the security deposit. And then I said, okay, what have you thought about operating capital? Like, how much money in operating capital do you want to keep in your account? And they're like, I haven't really thought of that. And I'm like, yeah, so what you've told me is you need $150,000 to start your business, right? Let's say it's a restaurant, to buy all your kitchen equipment and your freezers and your fridges and your tables and bar stools and everything you've got in your restaurant. But you're not thinking long-term that you're going to need operating capital, right? Cash in a bank account for your company to pay the ongoing expenses. If you want to start advertising, right? If you want to order company checks, for God's sake, those cost money. Every little thing costs money. And they're like, wow, well, how much more do I need for that? And I'm like, well, how much is your rent going to be? And they're like, well, $5,000 a month. I'm again using that as an example. And they're like, wow, $5,000 a month. I'm like, all right, so I would keep 6 months worth. They're like, well, that's $30,000. I mean, yeah. Don't you want to know that if you're signing a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease that you're getting into this new business that you don't even know if it's going to work? I mean, hopefully it will, and I know you're going to work hard, but don't you want to know that you got some kind of a cushion? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, so there's $30,000 there. Then add the $5,000 security deposit, $35,000. Now, how much is your payroll going to be? And if you're lucky, it'd be like, well, it's going to be me and my wife. We're going to be starting the business. We're going to hire a couple employees, whatever. Okay, so you and your wife are going to work for free? And that's kind of a dream story when you're starting a business, if you don't need the money initially, because you can just put in your sweat equity to help build the business. And then when it starts making money, you can pull your money out. But most people need to start making something, right? Say, well, it's me and my wife, but we're going to get a couple of waiters and get a chef and whatever. I'm saying, okay, so what's your monthly payroll going to be? They'd be like, oh, I don't know, maybe $10,000. I'm like, wow. So that's $10,000 your monthly payroll, 6 months of monthly payroll, $60,000. So just with rent and payroll, you're looking at about $95,000 with your security deposit. So just to round up, I call it $100,000. So ideally, if you're having some restaurant that's going to have that, that's ideally what you would like to have. There's people that start businesses with far less. But again, it depends on your particular situation. If you're willing to work yourself and build the business so you're not costing the business a lot of money, you don't need as much money in your operating account, right? If you're not going to hire as many people, if your rent's not as high, there's so many factors. And again, I'm only giving you my suggestions. Some people, if they're well funded, they might want to have a full year of operating expenses. That's an extreme example, but that's pretty safe right there. If people are working hard and making the right decisions, that's a pretty good number there to make sure you survive. But for me, if I'm getting into a business, I've already spent a lot of time doing my homework, understanding the numbers, and diving deep and knowing, hey, within 2 or 3 months, we should at least be breaking even. And what I mean by that is you're able to pay the rent and pay the payroll and pay the utilities and all the other costs of doing business, and you're not losing money. So your money in your operating account isn't going down every single month. That's a good scenario, right? In a couple months to get to that point. And then once you get above water, right? Once you get into the black and you start making money, now you've got money to distribute to the ownership, or to pay yourself more, or every now and then you give your employees bonuses to reward them for great efforts and things like that, for helping you get your business off the ground and all that stuff. So going back to the simple question that you asked originally, is how much does one need to start a small business? It's really going to depend on the business. I've seen startups at home start for little to nothing. They just use their existing computer at home, their cell phone, whatever they have at home, and they start their business for basically nothing. What costs them money is actually register the business online. They go and register it with the Secretary of State's website, and there's a fee for that, right? And getting the basic stuff, and they might go buy a few extra, supplies, printers, pens, pencils, whatever. But in general, you can start a small business for next to nothing, especially you youngsters out there that are starting a business that you want to do where you're like managing somebody's social media, or you're building funnels, or doing whatever you're doing. A lot of that can be done for next to nothing. You probably already have a laptop or some kind of device that can allow you to do your work. So those businesses won't cost a lot. But for those of you that want to take this huge leap and get out there and be in the shopping centers or have a building or something like that, that's a whole nother can of worms, and that's something you're going to have to really budget for. Okay, everybody, I hope this video was helpful. If you liked it, please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, please comment below. I'm going to do my best to keep delivering as much information as I possibly can, while at the same time running all my own businesses. Boy, it's a lot of fun. And remember, in life and in business, no matter how hard it gets, never give up, keep pushing, and be the hustler.